How's it going, guys? Welcome back to TheBlueShifting, and welcome to a fantastic return to a fantastic series. If you didn't know, I've covered the actual main game, the House of Fata Morgana, earlier on this channel's history. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen that or read that, you need to go watch that, because this is something of a sequel prequel. I believe it takes place before a lot of the events of the actual game, but naturally it's going to be making a lot of references, as will I, because this was a game that was intended to be played afterwards. So if you are new and maybe you just looked up the House of Fata Morgana and you found this video somehow, I will put in a link in the description, or probably in the corner somewhere. Just look around, there will be a link to the actual original game that you can go to there. That way you can avoid any potential spoilers, because the series is incredible. The first game is literally like mind-blowing, life-changing, worth every second of your time. I highly recommend you support the developers by purchasing the game, playing it yourself, and then joining me on my adventure through it to see what my reactions were. That way we can kind of collaborate ideas and such. It's a really, really good series, and if you can stand my terrible voice acting, I think it's worth your time and spending that treat. But of course, I'm biased, so I don't know, take what I say with a grain of salt. But thank you so much for joining me here at the House of Fata Morgana, Requiem for Innocence. Like I said, this is like a prequel sequel. I have no real idea what to expect, except for the fact that I was able to get my hands on this game at the same time I got the House of Fata Morgana for Manga Gamer. So thank you so much for supporting the channel directly, you guys. It was wonderful to get your email and just to have you reach out and being so kind to me and trying to support my channel directly. I look forward to being able to dive into the story, but remember, these stories were never meant to be good stories. There were happy moments and were fun memories, fantastic characters, but ultimately these are tragedies. So if you're coming to try and have a good, fun, uplifting time, just like what we were having on Wednesdays before this when we played Ethereal Enigma, this is going to be a big 180 from that. We'll try and, keep things at least not too morbid, but just don't come here expecting this to have a lot of joy. But I do expect to have some meaningful discussion about some probably sensitive topics, because again, that was what the first game was really king of, besides tackling topics that are harder to discuss and presenting them in really incredible ways. Also, just look forward to the music. As you can tell, the atmospheric quality of the music and the setting and the tone and everything is just off the charts, so I look forward to it. I don't want to ramble too much more. I feel like that's a good enough of a pretense. Just wanted to say I'm really happy that you're here. I hope you enjoy this series. I look forward to reading your comments and hearing your thoughts about this series. It's nice to be back to the House of Fata Morgana. I took a bigger break than I intended between the last game and this game, but at the same time, I think the break will do more good than bad. So we'll see if there's anything interesting to find here, maybe some new secrets to kind of peruse through, but ultimately I'm guessing this is just more of a experience and not so much meant to be as much of a mystery, because again, we already understand the large scope of what happens, so this is probably just for us to have a better understanding of the characters which we fell in love with in the last game. So hopefully you have a good time with me, and let's just jump right into it, shall we? So, main episode, and then there's sub-episodes. I'm not sure what this is. Side stories, so I'm guessing, this reminds me a lot of the build of Seabed, where, there's a main story, but then there are, side paths that we kind of get to explore as we go. Maybe they'll unlock as we go, maybe we have access to all of them immediately. I don't know. We'll have to find out. If you want to clarify some of that for me, please go ahead, but make sure you keep the spoilers away. Remember, this is about experiencing this game, and it's, original way, from an original point of view. I don't know anything about this game besides the fact that it is tied to a previous game. So I would appreciate it for you, me, and everyone else that we avoid spoilers, because it ruins the fun. So anyway, the main episode for Requiem of Innocence. Let's get started. Produced by Novatical? Move the cursor to the bottom right corner of the screen to display in-game menu. Okay. Hear me speedily, O Lord, my spirit faileth. Hide not thy face from me, lest I be like unto them that go down into the pit. Cause me to hear thy loving kindness in the morning, do I just faint. Deliver me, O Lord, from mine enemies. I flee into thee to hide thee. Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God. Thy spirit is good. Lead me into the land of uprightness. Quicken me, O Lord, for thy name's sake, for the righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble, and for thy mercy cut off mine enemies, and destroy all them that afflict my soul. For I am thy servant. Nice start. Psalms 143, 7 through 12. Bariner. Cheers! The saints' blood and good fortune to all. Alright, so yeah. Okay, so here's how we do the saving stuff. Oh boy. Alright, YouTube. Don't hate me. Here's Morgana. Voices. So many voices. Laughing. Was this the 10th such party? The 20th? I no longer had any idea. The Lord just merely drank of my blood. My father had not blessed me with his miracle, so wealthy nobles could fill their goblets with it. My blood was for the poor, for the infirm, and the destitute. Why am I here? Why am I not doing my father's work? With each passing moment, my body grew colder and colder. With each while a mad, fiery fervor spread amongst the partygoers. Father, it hurts. My soul hurt far more than my body. It felt like it was caked in a dozen places, about to shatter. Again and again I've told myself it was just a trial, that God was simply testing me, but I didn't think I could bear it much longer. A horrible black miasma spilled from the wounds of my flesh, filling the room. Oh boy, oh boy. It was probably an illusion, something only I could see. The miasma soon began consuming my spirit. All my life I spent telling myself to be pure, just, righteous. All for that was corroding away, ripping me asunder. Father, O Lord, of thy mercy, cut off my enemies, and destroy all them that afflict my soul. For I am thy servant. I am thy servant. Please, O Father, deliver unto these sinners thy holy judgment. Cast them down into the depths of hell. For the sins thy world commit against thy faithful servant. Disguised as a prayer, I cursed them. For the first time in my life, I wished someone ill. I did what a saint, what the daughter of God, must never do. And in that moment, I committed a sin greater than anyone else in that room. The curse. The girl! Look at her face! I began to hear panicked voices rising up all around the hall. However, I was completely oblivious to the cause of the unrest. In fact, I assumed that perhaps God had heard my wish and struck down some of my partygoers. The Lord marched over to where I sat in chains, grabbed me by the hair, and yanked my head up. In his other hand, he held a sword. A disgusted grimace was carved onto his face, as though he were looking down at the filthiest thing in the world. You're a damned witch wearing the saint's skin! Jacopo. I didn't know we'd see you so early. So, welcome to the House of Fata Morgana! We start off strong today. So, just a recapping, of course, this is at the manor of the Lord, who discovered, like, rumors of this girl who apparently could heal the sick with her blood. Whether it was coincidence or not, doesn't matter. She felt that she'd been blessed to be, like, the daughter of God because her mother had a baby by claiming to not have had a man to her. And Morgana was kind of, as a child, was going around claiming to be the servant of God, trying to heal people and bring them hope, which she did. She was seen as a saint. But the Lord of the Manor heard that she could, like, restore youth and could, like, heal the sick. And so he, like, kidnapped her with permission, because her mom sold her to the Lord. And then he came here, and he just kind of kept her and would, like, bleed her and then infuse wine with her blood and offer it to his party guests as kind of like a menagerie almost. Jacopo here is going to be one of the people who's going to intervene, but he's not here at the palace for no reason. He's got other motives as well. But yeah. So, with that intense intro, and my terrible voice acting. Let's jump back into it. This is worse than I expected. The stench of rotting flesh hung in the air. Corpses were strewn about the room in varying states of decay. Blood pooled on the floor, black and thick as mud. An eyeball hung loose from one body, half decomposed and about as much liquid as it was solid. On many, white bone was visible through patches of flesh that had rotted away entirely. Fetch, how long were they here? Some had been worked to death. Others died of any number of diseases, and they were the lucky ones. Several bodies bore stab wounds from head to toe. Others looked like someone had tried to rip them in two. Some had been burned until their entire bodies shriveled, and some were covered in blisters. There was no shortage of people who had obviously been tortured, though the man on the other end of the torture, the Lord Barnier, thought of it as more of a leisure activity. The Lord was spoken of in whispers as the second coming of the great tyrant of old, though it wasn't until I snuck into his manor and saw it for myself that I truly understood how accurate that was. He was a damned psychopath. I apologize that I couldn't make it in time to save you all. I'm hardly a religious man, but for you, I think I can spare a prayer. Rest in peace. I'm not myself today, though I suppose that shouldn't be a surprise considering what today is. I wonder if that girl from the other day is among the dead. No, I need to stay focused. If this goes south, I'll be joining the piles of bodies. God, I'm starting to get a little nervous. Don't go weak in the knees now, Jacopo. How can I ever expect to go out of this world if I can ever to go out into the world if I can't even keep myself together for something as straightforward as this? I can do this, no problem. Let's start ourselves a revolt. That's why he's here. He's leading a revolt, and I think, if I remember correctly, Jacopo is like a bastard son of the Lord. Like, I don't know if he knows that yet or not, but there's a reason why he's involved in the rebellion. It all began a little over 2 weeks earlier. The local lord's iron-fisted rule was destroying the commoners, and this went doubly for those living in poverty who were barely scraping by before taxes. You could hardly take 3 steps out in the slums without hearing someone curse the Lord. I have no idea who first proposed the plan. Everything came together so smoothly, so quickly, it's almost a blur. What started as an everyday litany of complaints hurled back and forth between the usual crew of young, ignorant men in the pub soon escalated, ballooning into a full-fledged plot to strike back. He treats us like dog crap. We're the ones working his gosh darn land. Let's give that bee what's coming. Over the next few days, word of the plot spread through the slums, and a number of volunteers grew into an impressive pace. And the more people we had on board, the more realistic it all started to become. While the original plan amounted to charging in headlong with whatever weapons we could scrounge together, it quickly evolved into a more sensible scheme to infiltrate the Lord's manor and free his slaves. It was no secret that the Lord was purchasing far more slaves than he should have any reasonable use for. What we didn't know was what he did with the slaves, that the banquets he so loved to throw were actually 6 sadistic torture parties. What a lovely guy. The best we could do was infer their living conditions were less than ideal from the fact that the Lord kept acquiring more. And while the plan to free the Lord's slaves was undeniably rooted in righteous desire, I would be lying if I said everyone's intentions were so pure. We wanted to right an injustice, absolutely, but the prevailing desire was for vengeance, to give the Lord a little comeuppance. Part of it was also calculated, that it would be advantageous for it to look like a slave revolt rather than a civilian uprising. I mean, he's got a point there. If we struck from the outside, we would be liable to bring the Lord's wrath down upon more than just a handful of us involved. But if the blow came from inside, he couldn't blame us. Secondly, the Lord's mansion sat atop a hill, which meant the soldiers had advantage of terrain. It would be nigh impossible for a band of lowly, ill-equipped peasants to break through to his defenses, and we certainly didn't have the money to hire mercenaries. No amount of righteous anger were getting us anywhere near that manner. On the other hand, quietly getting one person aside to stir the pot was far more feasible. So ultimately, freeing the slaves was a means to an end. That was our best chance in dealing the Lord a real blow. Of course, that didn't mean we wouldn't save as many people as we could, nor did it mean it would be easy to pull off, or that any of us would make it out alive. The plan went as follows. We'd find a slave trader willing to sell one of us to the Lord. Once they had infiltrated, they would spread word of the scheme to other slaves, trying to get as many of them on board as possible. Finding a slave trader willing to cooperate was surprisingly easy. They were businessmen, enslaved their products. While the majority didn't give a damn what happened to the slaves after they received payment, there were more than a few who were displeased knowing their precious wares were being squandered. Slavers are supposed to be long-term workers. Slaves are meant to be long-term workers. They're not meant to be expendable. They require food and rest and some semblance of reasonable living conditions. It was far from the glamorous life of obviously, but most sensible slave owners at least had a vested interest in keeping their workers alive. Also, you got to remember too, like slavery in general is bad and evil in every sense, but at least back in the day, it often wasn't purely race-based. That's sad to say, but like a lot of times slavery was what would happen in lieu of what we now have as bankruptcy. If you were to incur debts you couldn't pay off, slavery was often the option, like at least to protect the rest of your family from like that fate. Although it tended to start to spread as a punishment to your family as well, especially if the debt were big enough. Horrible and terrible as well, but you got to remember that like a lot of cultures saw slavery as a way to pay back your debts. Which, I mean, it's far, which I can't really defend it at all, but it's like, it's good to keep in mind that a lot of people who were slaves here were like seen as like they likely were civilians at one point. They likely were peasants at one point. They were citizens. And so in that way, it definitely, it's still like horrendous, but it's not unreasonable to have this kind of scenario play up where somebody could sneak in and like not be obviously like seen as like obtusely appearing. Like if he was a peasant, he could have been a slave just as easily. Man, I'm glad that we're past that. I mean, seriously. Ugh. Although it's sad that it still happens, you know? It still happens. In different forms, but it still happens, and that's what's really sad. Anyway. However, that was far from the case with Lord Barnier. Barnier. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Here, hang on. Where's the history, the backlog? Barnier. Again, we're also going to see the problem where I can't handle French words. A lot of this is going to be French like influence, so I apologize. Slaves were, of course, the property of whoever purchased them, and a mere slave trader had no place complaining about how they were being treated. That didn't mean the traders had to like it, though, and there were a small collective of them who staunchly refused to do business with the Lord, quietly mocking any who did. Nobody openly spoke ill of the Lord, let alone opposed him directly. Not only because the land was under his control, but because he was a madman, and everyone knew it. So they would help us get in, nothing more. But that was fine. That was all we needed from them to put our plan into action. And the vanguard of our operation, the one who would be infiltrating the Lord's manor, was me. I volunteered for this position, practically at the heat of the moment, but also because I was confident I could pull it off. Above all, though, I didn't want to believe that I couldn't manage such a straightforward task. I had to step up and take initiative, or I'd never escape this life as a poor, lowly scum dweller. Crawling through the dirt, everyone, nobles and peasants alike, looking down on me, thinking I'm worthless. That wouldn't be for me. That would be me for my whole pathetic life. Like hell, I was gonna let that happen. I wanted to claw my way up as high as I could manage. I didn't want to surrender, to accept that I was powerless. I wanted to make something of my one and only life. We chose the beginning of the Lord's next banquet for my infiltration, and that was when I saw the horror for myself. The abuse and the torture he put his slaves through. It was a gosh darn blood banquet. Any mistake, no matter how small, would invite harsh discipline. If Barnier was in a particularly foul mood that day, he'd physically beat the wrongdoer. He had a particular fondness for activities that drew blood, though, and he would regularly gather together nobles with similar predilections at his manor. Go away, update. Once the banquet had begun, it generally continued for around 2 weeks. Fetch, man. Just freaking blood sport. The first thing I did after infiltrating was spread word of the plan to the other slaves. To be honest, I assumed it would be easy getting them to cooperate. They should have reviled Barnier more than anyone, after all. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Every ounce of my willpower had been drained from them. They were malnourished, unrested, and violently oppressed. I could hardly have convinced them to swat a mosquito. He had them completely under his thumb. Disgusting. Everyone was utterly terrified to fight back against Barnier. They would just as soon take their own lives. Hardly a day in, and the plan already seemed to have hit a wall. A full week I spent trying and failing to convince a single soul to assist in the revolt. Just as I was beginning to fear it might not work after all. Ooh, hello. You're very strapping. We need to talk. Come with me. He was a tall, muscular slave who spent most of his time doing physical labor. Despite the poor conditions, he seemed to be keeping himself in rather good shape. And unlike the other slaves, his eyes weren't filled with fear and resignation. But it wasn't a hope I saw in him either. Rather, they looked like the eyes of a bloodthirsty wolf. And his unkempt, greasy blonde hair only served to amplify the primal impression he gave off. Between that and the faint, cocky smirk visible on his lip, he more resembled the head of a gang of ruffians than a slave. I wasn't sure I was entirely wise to accompany him anywhere. But against my better judgment and with far too little information, I followed the man to the great hall. Interesting. There were a dozen or so nobles and upper-class men and women clustered about the hall. The air was filled with the scent of aromatic herbs, and it wasn't long before I realized that it was meant to mask the smell of blood. A large table was lined with plates stacked up with piles of glistening dark red meat. Noblemen sneered at us with wet lips as we entered the room. The contrast between the nobles' practiced, graceful mannerisms and the grotesque feast of which they were partaking was so bizarre, I simply stood there aghast. There was no room for anger to form. The Lord stood on a platform like a small stage at the far end of the room. Oh, he's horrifying! Oh, shut your eyes! Ugh! Are you the slave who offered to be this day's entertainment? The buff man nodded, dropping down to one knee. What does he mean by entertainment? Surely you've tried to merely inflict pain on helpless slaves. Would you, by any chance, be interested in something a little more exciting? Could you be any more disrespectful? Lord Barnier, you will do well to rid yourself of barbarians such as him. There, give the poor man a break. You can't expect an uneducated slave to be properly versed in the ways of polite society. Now elaborate, slave. Me and him, we duel. Right here, right now. Huh? Do you seriously think we haven't already pit slaves against each other numerous times by now? If that's all. I'm getting some very strong Squid Game vibes right now. Tell me, were they as vigorous as the two of us? Young and chopping at the bit? Well, if all you want to see is a couple of half-dead slaves limply flailing at each other, then help yourselves. But you're not gonna find many here who can give you a fight with some real oomph, you know? Heck, half the slaves here'd probably keel over at just a little shove. So I figured you might be up for a little change of pace. A barbarian like me. Whoa, I never agreed to this. Suck it up, you're a slave. Since when have you had the right to agree to anything? You make a compelling argument. Gratian, was it? My lord knows my name. I'm honored. I only remember because you came very highly recommended. That face! Ugh. He reminds me a lot of, like, what is it, Bluebeard from the Fate series? Like, Giles or Gills? Good. The slave trader said you were a descendant from a line of warriors that made a name for themselves fighting in the ancient Colosseum. I had assumed he was exaggerating. But perhaps there was some truth to it after all. Who can say? Couldn't tell you about my ancestors. But what I can tell you is that I love a good duel. Fought in the Colosseum, descended from gladiators, and I'm supposed to go to one-on-one against him? Very well. Gods, bring these two swords. Sir. Crap. What is he hoping to accomplish? To win the Baroner's favor? Guess I'll have to hope I can catch him by surprise as soon as... Hey, kid, listen up. What? Eyes forward, and keep it down. Listen carefully. Don't get any wise ideas, got it? Just go along with it. Everything's on the level. What are you scheming? You'll find out soon enough, assuming you can handle a sword anyhow. 2 guards approached us, each carrying a longsword. It was heavier than I expected, and it felt awkward in my hands. Both of our blades were badly chipped, clearly old and battle-worn. Of course, they wouldn't give new quality weapons to a pair of slaves, but a sword was still a sword. Beaten though they might be, I still had to be careful, or I'd be dead before I ever got a slave revolt off the ground. That said, I'd survived this long in the slums. I wasn't completely helpless, and I had experience with a dagger, though I wasn't sure how much help that would be now. The longer two-handed weapon still felt awkward in my hands. Yeah, the two weapons aren't comparable except for maybe the understanding of like how important footwork is in your sword in combat. As I squinted at the blade's hilt and adjusted my grip, trying to familiarize myself with the feel of it, Barnier took a seat, readying himself to spectate. That's when I caught sight of what lay hidden at the back of the stage. What? He's gonna see her. And it's disgusting because you gotta remember she was like, what, 14 at this time? I stood there, staring agape, completely forgetting I was but moments from a duel with a man twice my size. At the back of the stage was what looked like an altar draped in a thick white sheet and stained red. Atop it sat a young girl covered in gashes. Her head was drooped, so I couldn't see her face. But judging from her size, I didn't think she could be more than 10 years of age. Was she that young? Fetch. Some wounds were older and had already scabbed over. Some were swollen, bright red protrusions on her pale skin. Some were oozing pus, others were so fresh they were still bleeding. It was difficult to find a part of her body that wasn't cut. Hey, what do you think you're doing to that girl? I don't care who you are. No one deserves that. Even as I shouted at the Lord, the girl remained motionless. She seemed unconscious. Not dead yet, but it wouldn't be long. Silence, cur. I don't recall giving you permission to speak. Or if you'd rather lose your head right now, continue on as you are. Damned despot. Now, go on, get started. Give us a show befitting this grand affair. Fighting my urge to snap back at him, I turned to face the slave named Gratine. The other guests lined the walls, whispering among themselves, speculating about the potential victor. Sorry, curses. I keep clicking the wrong buttons. The crowd was so overwhelmed in Gratine's favor. To absolutely no surprise, they didn't even bother taking bets. Oh gosh, he's coming! Try not going down in one blow, kid. Hold on, what's the point of this? Slowly, Gratine lowered up into a crouch, and the next second he leapt at me like a tiger. There's an audible whoosh, and before I even had time to gasp, he was mere inches away. What choice do I have? I swung my sword up, catching Gratine's blade mid-descent and then attempting a parry, but there was far more weight in his strike than I expected. The impact caused my hands to sting painfully and my knees to buckle. I clenched my teeth, trying, at the very least, to hold my ground. Rah! Gratine barely gave me time to recover, let alone strike, before launching into a second attack. He handled the longsword so effortlessly, swinging it through the air in such impressive, perfect arcs that I could hardly believe they were both using the same weapon. Ah! I twisted out of the way, but not in time. The tip of his blade skinned the skin of my neck. And then, not even giving me a chance to catch my balance, he thrust his blade at me. While I managed to deflect the attack just in time, I wasn't able to follow through. Meanwhile, a wide, mocking smirk spread across Gratine's face. He seemed to be having the time of his life. Come on, kid. You're gonna have to do better than that if you want to keep your head. I rattled off several insults in my head, but unlike him, I couldn't spare the energy to put them into words. Pick it up, boy. Gosh darn it. That's all you got, kid? Thought you fared a little better. Shut your damned mouth! I was stuck on the defensive, and with every strike, he pushed me further and further back. I was almost up against the wall. I thought he said this was part of some plan, or was he just trying to get me to let down a guard down? He's conspiring with the Lord. He must be. Why challenge me to a duel, though? Did someone spill word of the plan to him? Come on! Give me your best shot, boy! Grr. Yes, very funny. You know darn well I'm barely managing as it is. You gotta at least try. Don't want to put our audience to sleep now, do we? Even the bones of my forearms are starting to sting. Don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Here, let me show you how it's done. God, I can't get the dang inch on him. Much more of this and I'll be up against the wall. I'm dead if I don't go to the offensive. Now's my last chance, while I still got a breathing room. Hey, big guy, you may think you got an advantage, but not for long. Ha! That's rich coming from a guy who can't even get one swing in on me. It was all a trick to get your guard down. I've been saving this one just for you, meathead. Good luck dodging it, with that hulking body of yours. Now that's more like it. Let me have it, kid. I hopped backward a couple paces until my heel was pressed against the wall. There was no backing down, not anymore. Breathing heavily, I lifted my blade and pointed at Gratin. He pointed his blade in turn, a cocky grin plastered on his face. And then, I kicked off the ground hard, sending me flying toward him. My sword held down near my waist, his above his head. And then, whoosh! He whiffed his blade, ripping through the air just over my head. The mere force of the gale created by his swing was so intense. For a brief moment, I thought he might have knocked my head clean off my shoulders. But I was still breathing. And despite the exhaustion, my mind was incredibly clear and focused. I hadn't swung up at him, but slid across the floor. Your back's wide open. I lurched to my feet, spinning around, and swung my sword at his neck with everything I had. Ugh! Ugh! What? But my would-be grand comeback was deflected from behind without a bat of an eye. And hardly a wimpy deflect for that matter. My hands felt like they were on fire. A little bit on the dirty side, that was, but hey, not half bad, kid. Damn it. Just a little more oomph in that swing, you might have landed it. Too bad, too bad. I don't stand a chance against him head on, but he's not one to fall for some trick twice. I need a new plan. Back against the wall with you. Son of a... God! What's the matter, kid? That all you got? After all that talk, I was expecting a little more from you. Grr. He's got me completely under his thumb. I'm dead if I don't do something, but I can barely lift my arms anymore. It's getting harder to breathe. My vision's going blurry. Can't die yet. I'm not here, not now, not this darn brute. There has to be something. An opening I'm not seeing. Anything. Some way to turn the tables. Am I imagining it? Or did I just react to that quicker than usual? Is he doing what I think he's doing? Patterns were forming in my mind. I'd been through this routine so many times now, my body instinctively knew what came next. I'd parried his strike entirely by reflex. I wasn't so full of myself as to think that was a sign I was getting the upper hand. As much as I loathed to admit it, he had every imaginable advantage over me. I should have realized what he was doing sooner, but I'd been so focused on keeping my head attached to my sword in my hands, I hadn't had spared mental capacity to see beyond that. He was in complete control. The only reason I was able to keep up with him was because he was letting me. Because he was repeating the same sequence of attacks again and again. If I'm right, then next, he'll come from above. Ho ho! Right on the money. A clang like the peal of a bell echoed through the hall as our blades collided. It was much cleaner, more satisfying sound than they had made when they were struggling to keep up. I still don't know what he's scheming, but I'm not going to throw away this chance to win back some ground. Sparks flew with each clash of our swords, and Gratin's smile grew wider. I could hear murmuring bubble up in the galley as the tides turned. Cheering, cursing, confused gasps. But before long, the sound seemed to grow distant. I was just me and Gratin in a bubble of silence. Not even the sound of metal striking metal. My heavy breathing, the stomping of our feet, the distractingly loud pounding of my heart, the blood pumping through my veins. They all whispered away to nothing. Every one of my senses were focused on entirely two things: the image of our swords cutting clear arcs through the air, and Gratin's intent. That's it. Next overhead. He whispered so quietly that by all rights I should never have heard it, but his intentions came through loud and clear. And as if being controlled by that voice, I swung my sword down. After about half a dozen slashes, we locked blades and had a brief shoving match before putting a little distance between each other. And then we went at it again. To the audience, it would have looked like a fierce battle to the death, but it felt more like we were dancing than anything. I like this guy. Well, he was dancing. I was merely following his lead. But if that was his plan, whatever plan was, I had no choice but to dance to his beat. The only thing improvisation would get me was a sword through the heart. Meanwhile, sticking to the plan, I had nothing to worry about. No reason to fear his sword might go off course. After several more fierce clashes, we got in close again. We were both breathing pretty heavily by that point. I was drenched in sweat, and it felt like I'd collapse right there and then if I'd loosened up even for a second. Gratin tossed a glance off to the side of the briefest of moments. His lips came together, curling into a smile. Listen up. There's 3 paces back, then charge. Swing down as hard as you can. Put everything you've got into it. As soon as I signaled my acknowledgement, Gratin parried my sword off to the side. 1, 2, 3 paces back, then I gathered my strength into my legs. I crouched, like he had been at the beginning of the duel, envisioning myself as a tiger ready to pounce. And then we leapt at each other in perfect sync. Oh, this looks cool in my head. What? The harsh sound of metal striking metal, more piercing than anything else up to that point. For a heartbeat, the world went white. Then the whoosh of something ripped through the air. He threw his sword, didn't he? He threw his sword! It wasn't for another second or two that I realized what had happened. Breathing heavily, I looked down at the sword in my hand, only to find half of it missing. Gratin's blade appeared to have snapped as well. The gallery began buzzing. Are you all right? How dreadfully dangerous. A perverse grin spread across Gratin's lips. I finally understood what he'd been scheming. He wanted the swords to break, and he wanted it to look like an accident, hoping that we would be with the shattered blades went flying, a noble or two would be caught in the crossfire. That explained the whole song and dance, why he had us hitting each other's blades at the same spots again and again. But how the heck do you even expect that to work? That said, if I had gone on much longer, I don't think I would have lasted. You did pretty well, though, Jacopo. His plan seemed to have gone about as well as you could have reasonably expected. One piece is landed near the Barrier, the other embedded in the table. That's fine by me. I'd rather avoid causing any more scene before the actual revolt. Not that I would be opposed to seeing any of these madmen skewered. Gratin wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and surveyed the room. And obviously outclassed as he was by all the nobles, he still seemed much larger than anyone else in the room. He took a few moments to catch his breath and sauntered over to the center of the grand hall, taking another good look around the room before saying, Apologies for the disturbance, my lord. While ordinarily a duel's supposed to end with someone dead, looks like that's out of the question today. So mayhap we can reschedule. Put on another show in a day or two if you would like. Barnier seemed less than pleased with the outcome, but considering how rattled his guests were, he couldn't press the matter either. Very well. Now I believe you two deserve a reward for such a fine show. Ooh, what kind of reward? One I'm sure you'll be quite pleased with. The leftovers from today's feast. Gourmet cuisine, the likes of which mere slaves could only dream of getting your dirty hands on. You mean those bleeding scraps of mystery meat? Ha, worry not. There's pork in there. Or does your religion prohibit you from eating pig? Nah, gave up on religion long ago. I'm fine with eating meat. Most meat, anyway. I'll have the other slaves bring it down this evening, then. Now, the show's over. Begone with you! Gone we be, my lord. I'm still concerned about that girl, but there's nothing I can do for her right now. Hopefully she'll last long enough for the revolt, but with wounds like that... Hey, kid. Pick your beat ass up and let's get out of here. I'm not beat, thank you very much. Who are you trying to fool? Or are you trying to when you're wheezing up a lung? Getting huffy about it only makes you look more pathetic. Piss off, you inhuman monster. Ha ha ha! Now, do you have a wonderful day, ladies and gents. Well, that took an interesting turn. Once we were out of the hall and in the corridor, I took several deep breaths, finally letting loose of some of the tension I'd built up within me. As we made our way through the corridors, the sound of the nobles laughing and chattering amongst themselves faded into nothing. We headed for the rather barren waiting room where the slaves without assignments were kept. In essence, it was a human closet. I looked up at Gratin, who was standing beside me. I had about a dozen things I wanted to say to him, but I couldn't organize my thoughts into words. So I simply shrugged and pursed my lips. Yeah, that was a shame. Huh? What's a shame? You were hoping to kill at least one noble while the swords broke, weren't you? Ha ha ha! If only. I'm not that skilled. Heck no. You could have fooled me. If anything, I'd say we were lucky it went as well as it did. It's a dang good thing they gave us their old crusty swords, or we'd never managed to break them at all. If not to skewer one of the nobles, then why such lengths at all? Well, because otherwise we'd have to fight to the death, of course. No, that's not what I'm... Of course, we both knew who'd be standing here then. As much as I hated to admit it, he had me beat almost every category. For goodness sake, how did he even get that good with a sword? Is it hereditary or something? What I'm trying to figure out is what your ultimate objective was in this whole facade. Why challenge me to a duel at all? You're planning a revolt, aren't you, kid? What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. Denying it would only delay the inevitable, so no point in that. And I'm fairly certain he's not on the Lord's side, at least. If he was just trying to win the Lord's favor, I can't imagine a duel would have ended the way it did. I can probably trust him. Yes, I am. And I need other slaves' help to pull it off. But the little drones have been sucked to all their fight. You can't get anyone on board. Why even ask the question if you already know the answer? Hey now, no need for the lip, kid. I brought it up because I'm trying to tell you I'm in. You're in? Excuse me? What about anything you've done today would make me think you're in? Bear with me a second. You put yourself in the other slave's place. Some dick they've never met before shows up out of the blue saying, I've organized, I'll have you all set free, I need you to help out do it. You think they're gonna buy into it? Fair enough. They probably think it was like a ploy to see who was like loyal. But it is true I have people outside. Don't matter. You could be lying through your teeth, it wouldn't change a darn thing. All that matters is what they think you're worth getting behind. I see your point. These slaves have been driven to the very depths of despair. They need someone charismatic enough to pull them out of that pit before they can be sparked to take any sort of action. Before infiltrating, I imagined this would be much simpler. It would have seemed like it was rather naive of me. That's a whole lot of words to say the same thing I just said. Forget your fancy metaphors. It all boils down to this. Do they think they have a chance of you pulling it off, yes or no? These people, they don't got the energy to get all philosophical. They go with their gut. And the quickest way to their gut, show them you're strong. Now I'm starting to understand what the duel is for. The other slaves already know your prowess. So if I were to fight on the same level as you, then they'd be willing to hear you out exactly. Huh. Whoa there, kid. What the sigh? You trying to blow this place down or what? You could have easily accomplished that without putting on a darn show in front of the Lord and putting my life in danger. I wasn't just for the other slaves, kid. What do you mean? I wanted to make sure you weren't some yellow belly pissant. That you're actually capable of doing what you promise. And now I know that you got some semi-functional spine. I'm willing to help out with the revolt. Semi-functional, huh? Well, I'm glad it didn't disappoint you then. Given my performance back there, I couldn't blame you for deeming me beyond hope. Give yourself a little credit, kid. While I'm pretty sure the stories about my ancestors being gladiators are exaggerated, I did participate in a few death games myself back before I ended up here. Death games, okay, so he's definitely Norse. Like, it makes sense, that's kind of what I figured, but like, death games is definitely Norse. You should consider it a badge of honor that you fought a brute like me and lived to tell the tale. I was under the impression the church put an end to the gladiatorial games. Ah, right. It were underground. The rules may change, but not people. Okay, so maybe not then. Anyways, always a market for blood sports. Then yada yada got sold to the Lord, and here I am. That probably explains what he meant when he said he'd given up on religion. So, what's your story, kid? My money's on some rich aristocrat got in their head that he wants to play a hero, wants to stop the big bad Lord from being mean to slaves. What the heck gave you that idea? You strike me as more prissy rich boy than a ruffian's all. Prissy rich boy? I come from slums, so no, I'm not just some upper-class punk playing hero. That's a fact. What color me surprised? You sure don't talk or act like any of the slum boys I know. That's probably because... Nothing. And now I'm even more curious, damn it. Honestly, it's not that interesting, I promise. Forget I said anything. It's because I want to be able to blend in when I eventually leave the slums. But he doesn't need to know that. I only just met him. Whatever you say, then. The case, how about we do some proper introductions, huh? Name's Gratin, which you should already know. Nice meeting you, kid. Jacopo. I'm very glad to have met your support, Gratine. Don't mention it. I've been waiting to make the scumbags eat dirt myself. This is the perfect chance. Oh, right. One more thing I wanted to ask. What? How old are you? Excuse me? Is that relevant to anything? Jeez, kid. Someone really needs to teach you how to shut up and answer a simple question. I'm 19. Oh, thank goodness. I'm 20. Now I don't have to feel like a butt for calling you a kid. I'm only a year younger. That hardly makes me a kid. Here's a long time, kid. Now I've got it off my shoulders. I can put all my helping into your revolt. I'm starting to wonder if they ever want this guy's help. I don't know, man. Take what you can get. You had no one last time. Once I had Gratine on board, it was remarkable how quickly the rest of the slaves were to join in. They knew him, and they respected him, and they waited a long ways toward improving my own standing. As far as they were concerned, I had fought Gratine and managed to hold my own. And the big man was right. It was a clever plan of a moving it wasn't a clever plan or a moving speech these people needed to put the light back in their eyes. It was a show of strength. Over the next few days, as Barnier and his guests indulged themselves, word of the plan quickly spread beneath the surface. I started to see signs of life for the first time since I'd arrived. The majority of the slaves were emaciated and weak. There was a good possibility the guard would kill many of them. But still, I urged on any who hesitated by saying, if you choose to stay, you're guaranteed to be killed eventually. It was a truth, so to be sure, but in essence I was threatening them help or be left behind to die. And that was enough to convince them to grab the threads of hope I was offering, however frail it may be. We chose the 13th day of the banquet to commence the revolt. Waiting until almost the end of the party's usual 2-week duration gave us a slight tactical advantage. Naturally, Barnier's guests did not attend without their own protection, but after being made to watch over 2 weeks of debauchery, the guards would start getting exhausted. They would stop caring, and that was exactly what we needed. All right, and I think we're going to end here at the eve of the actual revolution. Ooh, it's getting exciting. This was a good first episode. Very interesting. So yeah, we're getting a lot of like intimate details about Jacopo's rise to power, I'm guessing. And yeah, the very young Morgana, and man, her story is so sad. It's so sad. Like, I don't care about what happens in the future. You still can't but help but feel horrible for her. My gosh. But yeah, hopefully we'll see some comeuppance in nice, flashy detail, because it definitely was very much like rushed in the storytelling of the previous game, so I'm excited to see it fleshed out properly. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed spending your time here on the channel and that you get to stick around for more future episodes. This will be coming out every Wednesday from here to the end of the series. There might be misses if I have something come up, but I usually post that. If you go to my Discord, you'll be able to see updates. You can also talk about the episode, and you can often chat with me there. Really nice place to connect. I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to my patrons. I have a few people who have been very supportive of the channel. They've been wonderful, and thank you so much for your direct support. If you're interested in supporting me directly and helping make the channel better and better, there's a link to the Patreon. You get access to a patron cast where I do every month, where I kind of give a behind the scenes look and just talk about stuff and answer direct questions that you have. But ultimately that's all of course optional. You do more than enough by just watching these videos, and if you do things like leaving comments, leaving likes, it makes a big difference for me. It helps me so much, so thank you so much for considering that. It means so much, and I'm so grateful to have you here, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think. So until the next video, watch me up. See me in next. I'll see you there.